This is Spiritual Souls Sliding Sideways, Chapter 5. Shall I trust I did it? How do I know? How do I grow? Do I trust I did it? Let me check again. There is no one way to do something. We can plan to do things the same way every time, but it can have unnoticeable variance. We can try to have a consistent life. We can attempt to make everything as perfect as possible. We can spend time making something as good as it can get. We can choose to try and plan and follow it exactly. We can try to make all we do normal. We can use whatever it takes to be exact all the time. When we choose to be exact all the time, it can seal our fate for repetitiveness and time-sucking rituals. We can try to stay safe and consistent, but at what price? We live each day with a set of rules and guidelines. People tell us what things are from the moment we are born. They teach and train us on how to live life. Finding what is useful defines the never-ending way to live life. What will keep our lives in order? The order we choose to live our lives is essential to maintaining a functioning life. When we choose not to use order, we choose chaos. We can hope the ways we choose will work. When we choose a new way and it succeeds, we are happy. When we choose a way that fails, we are sad. The more we succeed at something, the more likely we are to choose it. The more we fail at something, the less likely we are to keep choosing it. When we choose to go outside learned patterns, we choose to create something new. When we fail in new patterns, we begin to have doubts. When we fail in the process that should work, it also creates doubt. Failure can make us second-guess ourselves. Second-guessing ourselves makes us want to improve our understanding and methods. When we second-guess our processes, we end up stuck in a loop of doubt and uncertainty. At the loss of certainty, we attempt to reestablish certainty within ourselves. The need to reestablish certainty becomes a ritual of checking and rechecking everything. The ritual we can perform in excess can dominate our lives completely. When our ritual becomes a process of doubt, then we end up stuck with self-doubt. We spend more time trying to be certain when we have doubts. The perfection we seek to be certain can become time-consuming and frustrating. The lack of certainty is a lack of self-trust. Self-trust is when we can trust ourselves to get the process right. Insanity is thinking that if we pay more attention, we will get it perfect every time. When we lose self-trust, we lose confidence. When we lose confidence, we lose certainty. When we lose certainty, we lose our ability to function effectively. Sufficiency is our main goal for a healthy function in life. What makes how we function unhealthy? When does function become more frustration than happiness? Function becomes unhealthy when it interferes with happiness in our lives. Function becomes more frustrating when we spend too much time on something. We can be too focused and neglect parts of our lives that need attention. Spending too much time with hyperfocus may indicate obsessive-compulsive disorder. What are we obsessed with? I have found we are usually obsessed with being better in all we do. OCD is worse when we are trying to overcompensate for failure. The more we fail, the more we have the need to not fail. The need to not fail then creates a loop of repeated need for success. When we need to be successful in life, we tend to overcheck and recheck everything we do. The overcompensation for making a mistake is fear. The fear of making a mistake is a self-made prison. The more we mess up, the more it can diminish self-trust. The excessive actions we take to perfect our process can become all-consuming. When we become consumed by perfection, we create the perfect trap. We will always make mistakes and mess something up. If we don't let ourselves make mistakes and forgive ourselves, we push for perfection. When we force ourselves to be perfect, that can apply stress and pressure to our lives. The stress and pressure of trying not to make mistakes can cause us to make more mistakes. If we make more mistakes, we may have even more doubt and lack self-confidence. Doubting ourselves can make us fixate on avoiding mistakes. We can create a vicious, unhealthy cycle. When we force ourselves to make fewer mistakes, it becomes an unhealthy process. The more we force ourselves to be better, the more we learn how much we can handle. When we force ourselves beyond our limits and boundaries, we can push too hard too fast. Forcing ourselves can create the prison we build for ourselves to live in. We must give our minds time to process life. When we give the mind time to process life, we then give ourselves a chance to change. When we give our minds time to change, we adapt to partial perfection. When we adapt to partial perfection, we give ourselves time to improve. We need to give our minds time to process our mistakes instead of forcing ourselves to be perfect. We should not bypass the lessons we learn from our mistakes. We need to give the mind time to know why we made a mistake. The process of mental correction can become a pattern and a process. Mental correction can become part of our natural selves. We trust our natural selves when we allow for mistakes. If we don't let our minds process mistakes, we force them to comply without learning. The mind's process for making corrections depends on its processing power and time. We may not feel like we have the power and time for proper self-correction. We can choose not to learn from our mistakes. We can neglect learning why we make mistakes. We can become obsessive about self-connection to perfection. It can be a process to understand why we make mistakes. We must not only learn from our mistakes, but we must have a plan for our process. The plan for the process can cut down on obsessive behavior. A plan for the process may not get rid of doubt and obsessiveness. A planned process can cut down on how extreme doubt and obsessiveness affects us. A planned process is a process in which we plan for errors. A planned process is the best way we can do something without perfection. A plan of action is how I make it through my days. I need to learn from my mistakes and why I make mistakes. I must mentally allow for mental correction. I must slow down and not be in a hurry. I must be less focused on being perfect, so I can focus on learning. I will not function the way I want by forcing my mind to obey. I can function better by having a plan of process without any expectations. When I lower my expectations, I allow for errors. When I allow for errors, I have less stress and doubt from failing. When I give myself room for failure, I then offer myself the opportunity to be the best I can be. I shouldn't believe I can be perfect. It is the thought of perfection that leads to the repetitive process of being perfect. The process of being perfect becomes the repetition of trying and trying again. The need to try and try again becomes an obsession with not making mistakes. The plan of the process is to make room for being a human with a human mind. When I take the time to plan a process, I plan to be the best I can. The plan of the process is a list. My list has better and newer ways I can do things. I want to be self-sufficient. I need to trust that I will do my best. When using a plan of process and I fail, it will create less disappointment and doubt. I plan there should be some errors. Errors are the process that shows me how good I can be at something. When we create a plan of process and we act upon it, we must still leave room for change. The list should always be changeable. We should never create a list that we cannot alter or change. We can create an unchangeable list. We can fall back into the obsessive patterns of creating a perfect list. We must leave room for errors on our list. Processing our list helps us learn. We must always leave room for change and error. When we do not leave room for change and error, it is when we can reach for perfection. Our emotions form a strong connection to our plan of action. How we feel can be a reason we choose to succeed. The need to succeed and the feeling of failure usually depend on our emotional and mental state. We can fail and feel worse for our failures. We can choose not to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. When we choose to forgive ourselves, it is when we give ourselves a chance to succeed and feel good. When we give ourselves opportunities to succeed, we then help raise our self-confidence. Having better self-confidence helps us forgive ourselves when we fail. It is better to have an upward spiral than a downward spiral. The spiral we create can be one of self-forgiveness and self-reassurance. The spiral can be one of doubt, failure, and forcing ourselves to be perfect. The roads we travel and everything we think and feel go into the process of what we do. What we do and how we perform have a large basis for how we feel about ourselves. How we feel about ourselves then translates into how we will perform in any given process. How we perform the process will then be a way to have more self-confidence. When we mess up and forgive ourselves, we start a path to self-forgiveness. When we plan and do our best, it is when we become realistic in a non-perfect reality. We should always try to be better. We should not try to be better to the point that we can never do anything wrong. We should not become our worst critics. Self-confidence can be as harmful as a lack of it. We must recognize this whether we succeed or fail. Self-confidence can lead us to believe we never do anything wrong, no matter how many mistakes we make. The kind of self-confidence that can do no wrong is a person who has closed themselves off from reality. Reality being universal order being why things are what they are. When we cannot do wrong, that is a reality bubble that only surrounds us. A reality bubble around us shows our vanity and love for ourselves. We can forgive ourselves without enough reflection. We can create a reality bubble with instant forgiveness without lessons or learning. The obsession with keeping reality out is the confident OCD that has taken a different turn. Confident OCD is when our time matters more than anyone else's. We can believe our OCD is what the world should revolve around. We can obsess over failure and the pursuit of perfection. We can fail and choose not to care to the extreme. We can try to be perfect and judge others for not trying to be perfect. When we want to be perfect, we may never learn life lessons. When we don't learn, we fail to discover what we could do better. There are two sides to every coin. We must see that success and failure can both be unhealthy. We should always be diligent in questioning what we are doing and why. We should learn and question what can be better. We lose sight of reality when everything is correct or always wrong. Reality is a pre-designed order. We are human beings who exist in reality. We are still learning about reality and self. Creators design reality to work and function within certain perimeters. Creators designed us to live and learn within reality. We must create our own perimeters. If we step back and look at reality like air, water, and trees, we find it cannot fail or succeed. Things function according to reality's design. We have choices that transcend earthly reality. Reality for us encompasses lessons related to both the spiritual and the earthly. Reality cannot be more, but we can be more. Reality exemplifies perfection because it accomplishes what it is designed to do. Creators have crafted everything for our reality. We choose and write our own reality. Free will seems like a blessing and a curse. Free will is a blessing because it allows choices. Free will is a curse because of all the pain we can create for ourselves. We live and learn. We are an anomaly in reality. The choices we have go beyond reality's function. Would we want to be a perfect tree incapable of making any choices beyond ourselves? Free will is the plan of process. Free will gives room for the lack of perfection, which gives room for mistakes. If we were a tree, we would not make a mistake because a tree has no free will. Making mistakes is free will. We choose without constraint, and we are learning without restriction within reality. We should open ourselves to mistakes because we are not perfect. You take away free will and you take away mistakes. Take away free will and we would only be a function. Free will is learning from error. We should learn and know why we make mistakes. Caring about who we are and what we do is great. When we care too much or too little, it is unhealthy caring. When we choose not to care, it leads to significant dysfunction. We must apply balance and wisdom to our lives. We can begin our journey into a healthier life when we slow down. What is wisdom? Wisdom is the ability to determine the best possible result, even if it's not perfect. What is balance? When we learn balance, it is the ability to judge how fair any process can be. We can work on ourselves one day at a time. When we go too far with caring or uncaring, one way or another, we can slip into a vicious cycle. When we are healthy, we can have peace. What is healthy is not what is perfect. What is healthy is trying to be better. Striving for an unattainable level of improvement leads to our personal downfall. We may have doubts sometimes. We may have many negative emotions mixed with positive emotions. We may be better and worse at any time. It is important to remember we often may be a swinging pendulum. We must reduce our internal pace to focus on doing less rather than more. We must understand our limits and boundaries. How much can we do before we make a mistake? When we take on less, we give our minds time to catch up and process information. Taking time to process information helps us make fewer mistakes. The more we take on, the more stress we can have. The more stress, the more mistakes we can make. We need to adjust to who we are and not to the world. The world does not care how you feel and what your abilities are. The world is reality, and reality is a function. If we could adjust to reality, we would change like the seasons. We must put ourselves first sometimes, but not all the time. Wisdom is knowing and learning how we should live. Who are we and how do we function? What is the importance of learning to be ourselves? When we function, we discover who we are. It is important to learn to be ourselves. It is important to find our core. The core is the translation of all we can know. We have limited mental knowledge here on earth. The spiritual core is the foundation for a less stressful existence. Our spiritual knowledge helps us know what is true and what is false in the universe. When we know our true selves, we can begin our journey. When we know who we are, we can then understand how we fit in reality. What is our purpose? Our purpose is to exist and learn. Reality supplies essential needs. True spirituality is what we need to begin to learn. We serve a purpose of trial and error. We make mistakes when we do not understand. If we understand everything, then we could understand how to never make a mistake. Mistakes come from ignorance and a lack of focus. What is mental focus? Mental focus is when we can fine-tune the mind for a deeper analysis. In this world, it can be hard to focus on one thing for too long. We have the demands of living life. Focusing on one thing for too long leads to negligence towards living. How much should we focus on one thing? When should we take a break from our focus? We know we are focusing too much on one thing when we allow it to take over our time and energy. We should only focus on one thing until it tips the balance we need in life. We should take a break from our focus and recalibrate our minds. We are out of balance when we feel overwhelmed and frustrated with choices. Choices are not always a blessing. Choices are not always a curse. Choices are free will. Free will allows us to take risks and form a life for ourselves. We can take free will away from ourselves by giving ourselves harsh restrictions. We can give ourselves so much free will that we start to believe there are no restrictions. The balance of self-forgiveness and self-love is in finding true spiritual understanding. We can transform ourselves into the people we aspire to be. The natural ability to change lets our minds learn and transform over time. Getting to a better us takes listening and time. Do we give ourselves time? Do we allow ourselves to complete the mental process for each thing we need to process? I do not always give myself enough time. I often forget to not force the process because I get in a hurry. I must stop and listen when my life becomes too unmanageable. I take time when I can by planning ahead of time. I forget what I know often because I often find life overwhelming. I must remove things from my plate and only eat one thing at a time. I often believe I can do it all and get back to relaxing faster. I can do the list of things faster. I often trip myself up on what is best. I have had to try to be humble in all I do by turning to God. I am not always humble. I pray God gives me a humble nudge in humbling me. I have learned that pushing the limits too far can become destructive and unhealthy. I never stop learning new ways to learn. I often must step back from learning and try to be at peace with my core. There is wisdom in making planned choices. We gain wisdom when we slow down and listen to our core. Our core is our pure spiritual connection to God. God is real. I have self-proved that God is real. My self-proof may not be your self-proof. You can find out what you need when you stop and listen. This world will never stop turning, but we can. The world will always have something we need to take care of. We can find time to listen without neglecting anything too much. We can spend time finding our core. When we find our core, we can understand how to have a better balance. OCD is us being out of balance. We can learn what goes into being OCD. We can begin the journey of being less excessive in the things we do. We can focus on being less perfect. We can always try to be better, but not perfect.